Good evening, my dark minions. Welcome to Lady of Darkness Horror Podcast. This evening, I have another delicious dark special tale. Be warned though, my dark minions. This tale is certainly not safe to listen to at work, nor is it suitable for your younger, twisted, dark minion offspring. With that being said, continue at your own risk, as well as the rest of my demented souls. Come now, come a little closer, and we will begin. My name is Cindy Rokovich. I'm 29 years old. My life was fine up until this point. My life was never perfect. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst either. You wouldn't consider me a type of beauty queen quality of beauty. I am perhaps average in looks, and I will admit that I am proud of that, to say the least. I would be considered tall for a woman of my height. I stand 5.8 inches tall, with a slender figure of 125 pounds. My hair is strawberry blonde that falls just above my waist. My eyes are full and cinnamon brown, and I have a heart-shaped face. My very fair complexion limits me from being able to be exposed to the sun without a massive amount of sunscreen. Of course, without these necessities, the sun's treacherous heat could send me into a sunburnt blister outbreak. I once thought my life was shitty. That was before in the past. My life before compared to now was a luxury. My life was never supposed to play out this way. I was supposed to be a successful fashion designer or even a famous Hollywood actress on a big screen. This isn't the case here. Instead, I find myself locked behind these concrete walls within a metal bar cell wearing an orange jumpsuit with my hands tied prisoners. People like me don't become criminals. Unfortunately, anybody is capable of becoming a criminal. Sometimes it is very true that your worst enemy is yourself. I would do anything to have the life that I had before as shitty as it might have been back when I look back on it now. When did you start talking to him at work? The woman asked. A warm but prideful smile appeared across my face as I recalled that night. From my understanding with the information I've gathered about your former workplace, you never even gave Alexandra Kariba the time of the day, she continued. Well, it's true. I didn't give him the time of the day at first. Alexander was rather, a larger man, and heavier men were never quite my type. But something changed this time. All the men I've dated in the past were in shape. They had college degrees, careers, the looks, the bodies. Yet they were all just so damn self-centered and abusive. They were abusive assholes. None of my relationships ever worked with them, I explained. So you chose Alexander Kariva? Let's talk more about him. How was he as a person? What was it like working with him? I smiled. Well, yes. There had been some small talk in the workplace about how he had the biggest crush on me, so I thought I'd give him a chance and surprise him. I saw Alexandra on Facebook one night, so I decided to create a different account before I talked to him on Messenger. Alexandra had been really happy to have been talking to someone. I told him my fake name, and I think I added a picture of an overweight woman and a winky face of some sort. I don't know. There's been a lot that's happened since, and I don't quite remember everything word by word. I kept telling him that I had a surprise and I would really like for us to meet up sometime. Alexander had been so happy, and I must admit, I was too. I needed him to be happy. I needed to be happy. "What happened after your catfishing session with Alexander?" the officer asked. I smiled again. "The day we met, he was so happy. When I seen him, I must admit that I was very surprised. He hadn't looked like his usual self. He had lost some weight by little, and his hazel blue eyes were really big and beautiful. I had probably seen him at one of the most happiest times than what I've ever seen him before. Okay, I admit, he wasn't the happiest when he had actually seen me." "What was his reaction when he had seen the real you?" the officer asked, with a very suspicious look on her face. "Any person should or would have been upset. I told him that I just wanted to surprise him after I had been hearing the rumors at work. I told him everyone at work had told me about how he had had feelings for me for quite some time. He was just simply too shy to approach me. He was then happy. His biggest dreams of talking to me had now come true," I said proudly. "What happened next?" the officer asked. "After my attempt of approaching him, he was the one to take me out. One of the many things that I could not do. He felt that he owed it to me, so I just let him. Thank God for that matter. I could never afford even a decent restaurant to take him," I admitted, feeling utterly ashamed. "So what happened next? What happened after dinner?" the officer asked impatiently. "We talked for quite some time, and surprisingly I found out he was an orphan. He had no remaining family left and lost both his parents 2 years ago. I must admit that I did feel bad for him. Here I still had both my parents and he had no one. I remember him saying clearly to me that night. He said, 'I really do like you, Cindy. I've liked you for quite some time. I know women like you don't usually do things like this with guys like me, but it would really mean a lot to me if we spent some time together. As an orphan, it really can get lonely. Would you mind coming to my place after dinner?' I refused his offer, which was really stupid and inconsiderate on my part. I didn't account for his feelings for that matter, so I offered for him to come to my place instead. It was just a small, crummy apartment, but I have to admit, if I can make any type of good memories in it, I was more than willing to allow him to stay the night at my place." "What was Alexander's reaction to that?" "He was excited. He said it wasn't often that he'd get invited on dates, let alone to a woman's place, so he really didn't give it much thought. He was just really happy to have been getting the attention that he wanted from me, which I gave him. We left the restaurant that night and I drove him back to my apartment. When we got there, we talked more about life and watched a few movies together before." I paused and I could feel my face getting hot from blushing. "Go on," the officer added. Shall I add that this is the part of the story where things got a little steamy? It started with small things at first, such as touching and French kissing. But it seemed like Alexander was shy at first to take it to the next level. I was determined to change that. Someone needed to show him how to live, and I would make sure it was going to be me, I admit, flustered. "So what did you do? What was Alexander doing this whole time?" I grinned. I escorted Alexander to my bedroom. It was getting very close to what I needed to achieve, and I wanted to make sure that this special occasion was going to be one that he'd never forget. Anyway, he was finally in my room where I needed him to be, but the work wasn't quite finished yet. I sighed, remembering the challenges I faced that night. I needed to get to the good part of the date. I needed to seduce him in some way. I needed to get him to my bedroom so that I could get to all of that meat, I said. Of course, I couldn't just let a man of his size climb on top of me, so I had to be the one to dominate him. I was actually more happy by doing so. It was my job to please him. I was a seducer, I admitted lustfully as a toothy grin appeared across my face. He was very uncomfortable about removing his clothes at first, but I had my very own way of convincing him otherwise. Of course, I removed mine too, but I decided to change it to something rather more sexy. Black lingerie, perhaps. Alexander loved it. I could see him getting excited, if you know what I mean, I said with a wink. So I continued on and did the things he wanted me to do, while I allowed him to lie back on my bed. Alexander was clearly happy. I wasn't concerned about unwanted pregnancies at this point. They have medical science to take care of that kind of stuff these days, you know? And diseases, those weren't too much of a concern. I was sure he posed no real threat. After some time, I convinced him to allow me to blindfold him so that I could change it to something rather more sexy. Alexander didn't go against it and was actually delighted about that idea. I couldn't wait to get it. Oh my God, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I couldn't wait to get what I was dying to get all night. What exactly did you do after you blindfolded Alexander? The officer asked. In my dresser was a pair of handcuffs that I had from my previous relationships. I decided to keep those for special occasions in the bedroom. I went back over to where Alexander lay, then handcuffed him to the bed, I admitted. And what was Alexander doing at this point? The officer asked, dumbfounded. I sighed again. He wasn't happy about it. He was uncomfortable. This wasn't a part of the deal, and I lied to him. He kept yelling for me to remove the blindfold and handcuffs, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. I couldn't do that without achieving what I brought him to my apartment to do, I smiled. This wasn't how I planned the ordeal. I needed him, he needed me. We both needed each other. I couldn't allow him to see what was going to happen next. I couldn't let him escape. I needed him to stay. To stay with me. The plan wouldn't be complete without him. The officer had been looking very confused, yet terrified of what I would say next. Cindy, what did you do? I need you to be completely honest with me. I noticed the pure anger on the officer's face at this point, and it automatically provoked my shame. I went to the kitchen to find the largest and sharpest knife, then I returned to the bedroom. At this point, Alexander was beyond afraid. He was uncomfortable. He kept trying to free himself and cursing at me. He called me so many horrible names, so many ugly words that had been directed towards me from him. The funny thing is I wasn't even angry at him about it. Everything that was said had been true. I was all of these ugly things. I was a monster, a fucking maniac. It had to be done. What had Alexander been doing at this time, Cindy? I went over to him with my knife and I paused. And you stabbed him? You stabbed Alexander? Alexander wasn't letting up with his cries for help. It was a damn apartment and I had to keep him quiet. So that's when I went over to his restrained hands, and that's when I took the blade and slashed his wrist. The look he gave me, what he said to me, stopped my heart. All he could say was, "Why? I'm sorry, baby. I really did start to like you. I'm sorry that it has to be this way." What did you do next, Cindy? I hesitated as the shame spilled over. It wasn't like I was enjoying this. I didn't actually enjoy doing this to him. Yeah, of course, I may have found him repulsive before, but I actually did start to like him. Alexander changed something in me that no one else was able to, but there was something that still needed to be accomplished. I knew it was either now or never before I lost my nerve. That's when I went over and slashed his other wrist. I watched him bleed out. I never accounted for all of the work that I would actually have to do to accomplish my goal. I didn't know where to start. There had been so much flesh to cut through. All of that flesh, all of that meat, was the perfect recipe for dinner. Everybody was showing up. Mom and Dad, in-laws, cousins, my younger sister, my damn younger, successful, wealthy attorney of a sister. She was the one I was always being compared to. It was always her, I cried out. What did you do to Alexander? Tell me about that, the officer urged, with a very demanding, yet an irate tone to her voice. I felt a sharp pain rising up within my throat. I couldn't do it. It wasn't until I dismembered his arms and legs and sliced open his belly when I realized I just couldn't do it. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be when dismembering a human body then trying to prepare the flesh for a meal. I never read up on cannibalism and dismemberment before. I didn't think I would ever have to. I wished I had at that point, though. I was already so far into this whole thing that it was nearly impossible to get out. Turning myself in was out of the question and out of the picture. I wasn't going to accept defeat that easily. Not without at least trying to protect my freedom. So in my empty freezer it all went. I had to have found a way to have hidden him before people at work started talking about his disappearance. That was it. It was over for me. In the eyes of my parents, I was just going to be another loser to shame the family. Never having any money, always struggling, that was going to be me. I seen the officer gazing at me with a look of strong disgust on her face. I could still feel the shame rising up within me, and she could only gaze at me with that same disappointment in her face that fueled my shame even more. I had to do something to make them think I was doing just fine. For over 10 years, I worked a dead-end job. I was always the sister to eat dinner at family and friends' house. I was never the provider because I was just so damn poor, while my sister was successful in living it up. This dinner was going to be different. I thought it was going to be different. It was supposed to have been different, but I've still failed. Nothing ever worked for me, I cried out. A small part of me wanted to gain sympathy. I just thought I'd be able to provide a decent meal this year to make them think I was doing just fine for a change. Alexander, I thought with him I'd be able to make it happen. I was wrong, though. It still wasn't enough, and I still failed. Why did you do that to him? No human being deserves that, the officer said with intense fury in her voice. Alexander, he made the perfect candidate. He was alone, he had no one left, and I knew no one would be looking for him, I confessed shamefully. I didn't want him to die, ma'am. I really didn't. I didn't come to my senses until after he was gone, I managed to say as hot, wet tears welled up in my eyes. That's right. It wasn't until after he was dead when you came to your senses, Cindy. It wasn't until after your sick plan didn't work when you came to your senses. You lured him to your apartment with the intent to do what you did. No, it wasn't like that at all. I really started to like him for the amazing person he was. I really thought that I'd just be able to cut off the meat off of his bones and prepare a meal. If only I got rid of that stupid idea of trying to oppress my stupid family, he'd be here with me today. He'd be with me. We could have been together, I said as hot, wet tears ran down my cheeks. But you didn't. You continued on with the intent to do exactly what you intended to do when you took Alexander to your apartment, she said, her hand tightly gripping the manila folder. Look at this. You did this, the officer said as she opened the manila folder, placing the investigation pictures directly to me. These weren't pictures that I wanted to see. They had only resurfaced in my mind about what I had really done. The bloody, dismembered body of Alexander Kariba, who was just alive and fine less than 48 hours ago. I was mortified at the thought of me being the source of his brutal demise. I watched in absolute shame and terror as I read the expression of rage on the officer's face. She gathered the crime scene photos, then shuffled angrily out of the room. When she is gone, I am completely alone to reminisce my actions. A rush of sincerity had suddenly shot throughout my body, and the thoughts before that I had completely rejected had now suddenly came back to haunt my mind. I would have repulsed by this thought before and acted way sooner to prevent this issue, had I been thinking straight, if at all. I am confessing this now as I live out my days in a prison cell because I am scared. 3 weeks has passed since the murder, and I haven't been well. It's not the fear of being a prisoner behind the bars of a women's prison that's taken its toll on me. This fear is rooted deeper than that. The thought of it now fills me with terror. I fear that I am left with no other ultimatum other than to proceed forward to get more answers. I missed my period 3 weeks ago, and I am left with this pervading fear of uncertainty that I am now faced with. I think about that night back in my apartment, in my bedroom, where reckless, lustful passion was shared, and I can't help but wonder about the possibility of a new life now forming within me.
You won't die like the rest of them.
If you have enjoyed this tale, check out my other stories here in my dark universe. If you just stumbled across my dark universe, welcome. Feel free to have a peek around, and before you leave, hit that like and subscribe button as well as bell icon if you're watching on YouTube. That is all that I have for you this evening, my dog minions. Until next time, sweet dreams.